we announced the initiative for rebuilding resilient communities across the Gulf Coast, which is going to involve the area from Mobile to Galveston, multiple states who are going to be part of this initiative to get people thinking and talking about their own future and charting their own destiny in the future.
What does the research show as the potential risk to this area?
Well, it's a huge risk. We've already seen the tremendous degradation of land throughout Louisiana. We lose the equivalent of a football field of land every 38 minutes or so. And in response to that, this initiative is designed to have people sit down and think and talk about what their future ought to look like. Some very tough decisions that have to be made in communities, long-range planning as we go about the business of trying to secure funding to save our coastline. We must also be thinking about the what-ifs down the line.
We stand today in a place that has experienced widespread devastation due to the ravages of the coastal land loss and a deteriorating ecosystem. And as a result, one of the world's most significant deltaic systems, the Mississippi River, its delta wetlands, its estuaries, and its coastal reaches it supports, is in danger of being lost forever. Nowhere else in the United States, and probably on this continent, are communities facing comparable degradation due to risks of land loss, subsidence, rising sea levels, and disasters, both natural and man-made. The news today is not that we have discovered that this is an incredibly endangered region. No, what is important is that the local communities which make up this vast coastline from Florida to Texas now recognize that time is running out. Louisiana, of course, has its own unique risks, and they are, I suggest to you, of national and maybe international importance. The closure, a loss of the intercoastal waterway system, the continual frequent lack of availability of navigation on the Mississippi River, the significant disruption of imports and exports to and from the South Louisiana port facilities, the diaspora of potentially over 2 million people, the loss of vital energy assets used by every citizen in this country, and the loss of towns and communities. That is our risk. But the fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not, there are unique challenges facing communities throughout the Gulf Coast, from Florida to Texas. They need to prepare for an uncertain future as well, although it may be different, to take deliberate and well-planned actions to do all in their power to sustain the values of their economy, their environment, and their society. To that end, the America's Wetland Foundation announces today an initiative which we call Blue Ribbon Resilient Communities, Envisioning the Future of the Gulf Coast. This initiative is in response to the growing vulnerabilities that threaten coastal populations and indigenous cultures all along this coastline. For in truth, the livelihoods of 12 million people, the sustainability of rich natural resources supporting $635 billion in annual gross domestic product, the security of residential, commercial, and industrial assets valued at more than $2 trillion are increasingly vulnerable. Recent storms, Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike, my God, we know them too well. And disasters like the BP oil spill provide a glimpse into the future of Gulf Coast communities and necessitate our efforts to assist the plan to create more resilient communities themselves. In so doing, we would hope to give local voices to a national tragedy that is unfolding. As disastrous as those events were, the sobering reality of today is we ain't seen nothing yet. And thus it becomes clear that after years of shaking the bushes, going to Washington with sincere requests for support in the wake of mounting challenges, these communities and their citizens cannot afford to wait for more tragedy. They must begin to take action to envision their future, set plans in place for survival. We have faced the brutal truth that not all can be saved. And with that truth, determining what we value and what can be protected for our children and for their children is a responsibility which we suggest we must all shoulder. The America's Wetland Foundation is dedicated to a strong and stable future for this region, one that sustains its growth and economy by measured actions that sustain progress and abandons the notion of retreat due to inaction. We must begin to take positive steps, send a message of hope to those who wait for disasters to strike once again. The goal is to help empower our cities and towns along the Gulf to identify what makes each community unique, what actions are needed to achieve resiliency and, to the extent possible, sustain an environment, economy, and way of life. Blue Ribbon Resilient Communities Forum will be held initially in 12 locations, beginning in Lake Charles in March and Plaquemines in May. They will be followed by forums in Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. There are those who say, of course, that all politics is local. In our minds, so is the resilient planning. Local voices will assess local vulnerabilities and try to set into motion local planning to face these risks. We do not suggest that any of this is possible without change. Certainly there is no one living along the Gulf Coast today who honestly believes that change, both large and small, are not inevitable. But well-planned change can be positive and in many cases can open new economic avenues. What is not acceptable, quite frankly, is going forward is for us to perform consequential planning. That is, waiting for one disaster after another to act. As part of each forum, one of our partners, the Energy Corporation, will present critical data from its recently commissioned study of infrastructure assets in the Gulf communities, and an analysis of the costs and benefits of protecting and sustaining. The data is quite clear. The economic and environmental consequences of not restoring this degrading ecosystem and this coastline are greater than we ever thought. As we complete this process, we hope the communities will move forward with resilient planning to tackle the hard choices made necessary by the risks they face. We dedicate this year-and-a-half initiative to the communities and citizens who shall participate and give their best ideas and thought to help this region. And to facilitate this endeavor, the America's Wetland Foundation is partnering with Entergy, the Center for Planning Excellence, the National Association of Counties, the National Conference of State Legislators, Louisiana Sheriff's Association, and the local government officials throughout the Gulf region on this initiative. Government agencies are also critical to this endeavor, providing essential information on timeliness and funding at the state and federal level. We acknowledge our sponsors, Chevron, Shell, the Walton Foundation, and the Blue Moon Fund, for making these forums possible. Amid the chaos of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, the nation, of course, heard a great deal about the Gulf Coast vulnerability and specifically about wetland loss, thanks in no small part to the Plaquemine Parish President, Billy Nungesser. Today, many of you will see the loss up close on an airboat tour which has generously been arranged by Billy. We thank him as well as Jeff Hingle for the transportation his office is providing. As with all American wetland initiatives, these Blue Rim forums will focus on finding a balance that fosters mutual understanding and supports the interests of all diverse stakeholders. We believe it is critical for all parties to be at the table to sustain environmental and economic assets in this Gulf Coast region.
The great Louisiana writer Harnett Kane described the land, or supposed land, that we're focused on in our discussion about America's wetland like this. He said it's a place that seems to be unable to make up its mind whether it'll be land or water, so it compromises. And that compromise is what has us gathered today. We've spent an awful lot of time in the past looking backwards and trying to identify what caused this problem, what got us to the point that Louisiana, as we all know, loses the equivalent of a football field of land, depending on how much time passes, every 30 minutes, every 38 minutes, whatever the case may be. We spent a lot of time looking backward, trying to assess blame. This initiative is so important because it is looking forward, trying to identify solutions, trying to bring communities together and have them shape their own destiny along the entire coast that affects all the states represented today. I want to thank King and the America's Wetland Foundation for the tremendous work they have done in the past, for the leadership they have shown in an effort to bring people together and to cause literally national and international attention on the plight of our coastline, which affects not only those of you who reside on the coast, but really the entire nation. Because of the significance economically of this part of Louisiana, this part of the Gulf Coast, everyone in these states and everyone in America needs to be justifiably concerned about the problems that affect and threaten our coastline. This initiative, though, is a positive way to look forward and call upon people in their own communities to identify their problems and to shape their own destiny. And that's what I am so excited about, to be the chair of this endeavor, because it's going to call upon people to sit down and discuss what they want their future to look like and to make some concrete decisions and plans looking forward. Over the course of the next 18 months, America's Energy Coast Leadership Forums, as King said, will be held in 12 communities across the affected states, a chance for those individual communities to come together and have frank discussions about their future and about where we are going to go from here. It is going to be a very positive initiative that has been made possible through the generosity of America's Wetland Foundation with their many corporate partners that have been recognized. And Louisiana and our coastline offer tremendous benefits to the nation, as we all know. We've talked about this repeatedly, but it bears repeating today. What we offer to the nation by way of seafood, by way of energy, incomparable wildlife, navigable routes that make the commerce of America a reality, is all dependent upon the area that we're talking about today. So this has a profound impact on all of us in the affected areas, but an even more profound impact on this nation. And the more we can do to talk about the impact of this area on America, the better chance we have of success. This initiative is going to give people in their communities the opportunity to speak to Washington about what ought to be happening in the future, rather than listening to what Washington may tell us ought to happen in the future. And that's going to be a very important component of what takes place over the course of the next 18 months. I'm pleased to chair this endeavor and this initiative along with several of our co-chairs who I think are here today, and I'm grateful to join in this effort, looking forward to working with everybody over the course of the next 18 months. Thank you all for being here today.
We have said it 1,000 times, coastline is disappearing in remarkable ways. It is subsiding under its own weight. We have to do something dramatic. It's got to be holistic in order to do what is considered to be the largest water resource project in the history of the country by a great deal. And if we don't do it, it's what I said before, unfortunately. I mean, we can project, and scientists have, as to where we'll be around the year 2100. It could be 10 years later, 20 years. It doesn't make any difference. As long as we're continuing to subside, as long as we have the activity that is impacting the integrity of this ecosystem, it will gradually deteriorate and die, and we'll be left with open water. And you can take the Barataria Basin and the Barataria ecosystem. It begins at the coast, it ends at Donaldsonville. So it's just a question of the continuation of what's going on by nature, by man, by commerce, and project where it's going to end up. And at that juncture, we end up with a system where New Orleans, quite frankly, on all sides is surrounded pretty much by saltwater intrusion in the Gulf of Mexico. And the levee system, both north and south of New Orleans, that levee system's job in most cases will be to keep the Gulf out of the Mississippi and the Mississippi out of the Gulf. It's not, those levees aren't designed for that type of stress. So we're dealing with a massive local problem which would result in the ultimate diaspora of close to 2 million people, loss of towns and communities. and a loss of the oil and gas industry because the infrastructure required to support it is dependent upon that ecosystem to protect it. And it is hard to describe, quite frankly, the magnitude of the catastrophe facing us. And I think we understand it. I think these people that we've talked about in South Louisiana understand it. It is a tragic situation over which they have no control. And unfortunately, unless we handle it on a holistic basis, the incremental attempt to fix one problem after another is not going to help. But what we're doing in here, quite frankly, is trying to get people to understand what are their options, what can they do, are there ways they can build better, are there ways they can deal with this moving target in a better fashion than they are today. I think they can. Also, the other issue, quite frankly, ultimately is we need to figure out a way to get the true economic issues that will face this country properly presented to the country. I mean, if those institutions that depend upon, if those communities and areas which depended upon the Mississippi Basin, the 41% of the United States, to move, sell, and transport their product, if they understood that that is at risk, really at risk, not a hypothet, it's a real risk to their future. If they understood that, what would they then be saying? If our friends in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida understood that the intercoastal waterway system will not be there at the end of the day, what does that do to transportation running east and west? What does it do to the remarkable railway system that all ends up in New Orleans because of this port system, when there are no longer any rail systems being able to proceed out of New Orleans or into it? All of these things are real, and we can talk about the nuances of it, but they're all real, they're all at the table, and somehow this country's got to wake up to it.
It's been very positive today. Obviously, you've got a lot of folks come together from the government sector, the America's Wetland Foundation, which has done so much to call attention to the plight of the coastline and to do something about it and to create this initiative with corporate partners like Entergy and others who are coming to the table saying this is an important initiative for the states and we want to be involved in it. So it was a very positive message today and a very harsh, realistic message about the difficult challenges that all these states are facing.